part of a series of online discussions brought to you by the ACRL Instruction Section's Management and Leadership Committee. I'm Chris Miller, a member of the committee, and I'll be co-moderating this discussion with my committee colleague, Holly. First, a few announcements and details. This is the second in the series of webinars sponsored by our committee. The third and final webinar, which is titled Critical Reflection to Improve and Grow as Librarians Who Teach, will be held Friday, June 2nd from 11 to noon Central Time. We hope you'll join us for that. This session is being recorded, and when we have the link, we will send it out widely. And finally, we will begin with an approximately 40-minute presentation. Please ask your questions as we go along in the chat box, and after the presentations are complete, we will have a formal Q&A. Any questions you ask along the way will be flagged by Holly or myself and answered at the end. So, now to get underway, I'm very happy to introduce our first speaker for the session. We have Dawn Lowe-Winsenson. Dawn is the Wilsonville campus librarian at the Oregon Institute of Technology, and she has edited, written, and mentored and menteed in a number of places. In 2015, she guest edited the Fall Oregon Library Association Quarterly on mentoring, and in 2016, she edited the book, Beyond Mentoring, A Guide for Librarians and Information Professionals. This is actually how we came to ask Dawn to be part of our panel here today. And so I'm just going to go ahead and ask her to start us off.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So we usually think of mentoring, traditional mentoring, as a way to climb, grow somebody that's been in the profession, has experience in some way that we want to develop, providing their expertise for somebody else. And I am going to talk a little bit about that. I'm also going to talk about a variety of different types of mentoring programs and how they develop, and how to even develop your own, whether it's formal or informal. I have been working with the Lama Mentoring Group for the past 4 years. I chaired the committee and co-chaired the committee, and am now past chair, offering whatever questions they need answered so that they can go on and we have that continuous knowledge. The way that Lama Mentoring Committee works, if anybody has been part of it, is you, or the program, how it works, you as a mentee, you apply and you're paired with somebody who probably has more experience and has also applied to be a mentor. You participate over email, VoIP, any other type of communication method that you want. We do have some guidelines on how people connect to one another and setting up goals for your mentoring relationship and developing where you want to go as a team. Besides the online factor, it is very much a traditional mentoring program. The other place that I have experienced mentoring and about mentoring programs that really is where I started to see a convergence in different types of mentoring is through ACRL, the Distance Library section. I chaired an ad hoc committee a few years ago that looked at a variety of member engagement programs. And I'm not sure if the end goal, because we were just told member engagement programs, the end goal wasn't necessarily a mentoring program, but we ended up looking at a variety of mentoring programs. One of them was sponsorships, there was peer-to-peer mentoring, group mentoring, and traditional mentoring. So with traditional mentoring, there's a variety of ways to go, and I believe the other presenters are going to talk a bit more about what they're doing for a specific venue on that. So as I said, this isn't the only way to go. We're going to talk about 4 forms for the rest of my side of the presentation, and I'm going to talk about the cohort, peer-to-peer mentoring, sponsorship, and speed mentoring. So each one of them has their own different things. And I'm going to try and give examples of different programs that you could look at if this type of mentoring is something that's of interest to you. In 2013, that ad hoc committee, we put out a survey to everybody that was in the distance library section. And we asked them 2 questions. One of the questions, and the most important question to us, was which type of mentoring was of the most interest to them. And we gave little definitions of each one. The one that was above and beyond anything else was cohort mentoring. And this is where there is a group of people and a single leader among the group. There's usually a project or a single goal for that group. Some of the examples that you might think of in this would be a traditional graduate level class where you have the students and an instructor. Another example is the ALA Emerging Leaders Program. If you're an emerging leader, you're put into a group that has a project and some sort of mentor with that project. So somebody from the organization that's sponsoring your project that provides guidance in there. So those are 2 types or 2 instances of cohort mentoring that you might see. It's really good for getting a large group into a communal goal. And if you have a shortage of mentors, it is one way to go. One of the things that we have done in the lama mentoring group was one year we tried to pair multiple mentees with a single mentor. And some mentors, they took it as 2 separate relationships, and some they took them both on at the same time, which would kind of be that cohort. So you'd have 2 people at the same level working with somebody else. The next one is peer-to-peer mentoring. In peer-to-peer mentoring, you really have 2 people that are at similar levels with similar interests working together towards a common goal. One of the chapters in the book that I edited was on peer-to-peer mentoring by Max King and Dee Nguyen, and they have started a peer-to-peer mentoring program that they piloted it and then brought it to the Llama mentoring group, and the Llama mentoring group piloted it last year, and we're going through the evaluation right now. And it provided a connection between just a couple of people on a one-on-one at a similar level, and then it was up to them to develop the goals. The chapter goes into a lot more detail on that. This type of program is a little bit newer. It's something that you kind of come up with. It may have happened on a informal level. I know one way that it happened to me on an informal level was Bridget Birmingham, who is at Florida State University, and Catherine Quinnell, and she just moved positions, and I don't remember what her new position, but the 3 of us were at Florida State University libraries together, and we were working together on projects, and we built friendships based on working together on those projects, and working together continued past just the projects that we were working on. We were able to develop outside of the library and inside the library and continue our professional connections more than 10, 12 years later. So a peer-to-peer mentoring, while it can be a very set schedule, such as the one that Max King and Dee Nguyen have put together, it can also be this long-term relationship that lasts throughout your career. Speed mentoring is very different from peer-to-peer or cohort mentoring. You may have seen it at conferences. Most recently, I saw it at the Oregon Library Association conference. I was talking to somebody there, and one of the things that happens, if you've ever done speed dating, it's very much like that. You have people at a table, and a timer goes off, and you move to the next table. And you have that short time period, 5, 10, 15 minutes, to talk to the person get to know that person and ask questions. Maybe you make a connection there and you exchange information and you can continue it after that. So speed mentoring is a really good way to meet one-on-one and meet many people. It's important with this, as it is with the past two that I've talked about, to go in with a goal, something that you want to know, something that you want to connect with. So if your interest is in publishing more, you could go in and you could ask the people that you're meeting with, have you published? What have you published? Where are your interests? Sometimes it's not something so specific as that. Sometimes you just want to meet somebody in your region. I know when I first moved to Oregon, I joined the Lama Mentoring as a mentee, and all I asked for was somebody on the same coast, because I had moved here from the East Coast and I didn't know anybody out here. And that was a fantastic way to get involved with there. So speed mentoring, very quick one-on-one, make a connection, see if there's a mutual connection. If you have done speed mentoring or speed dating, it's very much like that without the romance, I hope. The next one is sponsorships. Sponsorships are this area, very much like racing, where you would go out and you would find somebody or a business that would work with you to help you on a specific project. So you would, if you wanted to build the next ALA Connect, maybe you would talk to ALA and you would talk to a software development company, and they would be able to sponsor you on a project like that. It is very goal-driven, and it is something that there's not usually a group of sponsors out there waiting for somebody to come along and say, hey, that looks like a cool project, I'll work on it. It's usually somebody comes up with a cool project that goes out and looks for sponsors. One of the examples is here at Oregon Tech, we have a sponsorship program for all of the engineering students and some of the health sciences students that they do senior projects, and so they're going off and they're looking for specific projects, and these companies will sometimes sponsor those projects, and we've worked with a number of different groups. It's the same thing. I hate to use publishing as another example, but that would be another example. If you know somebody that is an editor of something and you're like, hey, I really have an idea, I think that this would work well with this, maybe we could develop it further, that would be somebody that you could work with. Or if you're in an institution that has somebody that's very, very active in the field, has done some research in an area that you're interested in, you could go talk to them and say, hey, would you be willing to sponsor me in doing a little bit more research on this, or develop my research techniques so that I could do more in this area. Another example actually in libraries is a few years ago I did some research in virtual reference on how people ask questions in virtual reference, and it was specific to pranks, and I went through the local regional service, which is called Answerland, and I spoke to the people at Answerland and I asked them if I could use their information. We went through that whole process, but they kind of were able to help me work on that project. So sponsorship is a very specific project. The important thing to keep in mind, or the common theme across any mentoring program that I have researched or participated in, is you make a pairing, and the ones that are most successful have clearly defined and communicated goals. If it's a traditional mentoring program, those goals probably come from the mentee, the person that is seeking out the information. So with Llama, my goal was to make connections on the West Coast. With some of the other things that I've seen are people specifically interested in presenting at conferences, people that want to get into publishing. Very common for institution-specific mentoring programs is to have a program to help you get tenure or promotion. at the academic level. So one of the things we do to help people do this in Llama is we ask the duos to complete a goal sheet, have some sort of purpose, and we pair people based on the reasons they give for wanting to be a mentor when they apply. In a cohort, there's usually a common goal of a degree, finishing a program, working on some sort of project together. Some of the other ones, the peer mentoring, there's usually a common goal that the two people are working towards together. Another example besides Bridget, Kat, and I is when I was, again, at Florida State, a different person had come to me and they were very interested in going and presenting at a conference. And I was the staff development person, so they said, hey, how do we do this? Can we work on something together? The person had a great idea, and we worked together on that idea, wrote a paper, and that's actually evolved off of that paper into the first book, and we wrote that book together, Suzanne Bike and I. So that was a one-to-one peer relationship that we worked on that with towards that common goal. Another thing of being a successful duo is making sure that whatever communication you have is consistent. So scheduling communication. I know my Llama mentor, Jennifer Abramson, who used to be at UCLA, she retired. She and I spoke once a month on the phone, and this was 2008. We recommend that people in Llama and other programs, they have a regular communication schedule no matter what type of communication they're doing. Another mentee and I, Tamara, I'm sorry, Tamara, I forget your last name right now if you're here. She's in Australia, so phone conversations and voice over IP were not exactly options for us, but we had bi-weekly emails over the course of our mentor relationship, and that was through IFLA. The other things that, or the last thing that makes mentoring relationships really work well, besides goals, besides communication, is follow through. And I know that sounds like I'm saying the same thing, but just making sure that whatever you set at the beginning of the relationship, you follow through to those goals. You make sure that you really are communicating. And if it is a formal program as opposed to an informal one, if there's a problem, let the program people know that there is a problem. Let the outside people that are organizing this know what's going on and what's not working, because you may not be the only person that's had that issue, and there may be some sort of resolution that's already been worked out. So make sure that the communication is there, the goals are there, and the follow-through is there. This is my contact information. Like Chris said at the beginning, we are going to have questions and answer at the end. So I'm going to pass this off on to the next group.
Great, thanks, Dawn. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick introduction for our next three speakers. We have three librarians, all from the University of Texas at Austin. We have Sarah Brandt, who is the librarian for first-year programs. She teaches information literacy skills in the undergraduate core curriculum and works with the School of Undergraduate Studies to incorporate information literacy into a variety of programs. She mentors graduate students to teach first-year students and supports subject liaison librarians in their teaching. We also have Elise Naka. She's the head of the Information Literacy Services, and she manages a unit that integrates information literacy skills into the first-year curriculum and supports subject liaison librarians in their teaching. She developed and managed a peer mentoring program for library staff who teach. And finally, we are joined by Crystal Wyatt Baxter, who is the head of assessment at UT. Though she's now in a role focusing on assessment, in her previous role, she taught first-year students and mentored graduate students into teaching roles as the Educational Development Librarian at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. So please take it away, UT.
Hi, this is Crystal. Elise, Sarah, and I are all here together, and we're going to talk about how we've approached mentoring as members of a teaching-focused department called Teaching and Learning Services at the University of Texas Libraries. And I will start us off by discussing my approach to mentoring a graduate student employee into a dedicated teaching position. So first-year students here at UT must enroll in a signature course, which are classes taught by distinguished faculty members on topics of their choice that are designed to introduce students to UT's academic community. Each course is supposed to teach to information literacy learning outcomes that have been adapted by the program, but since each course has a completely different curriculum, we strive to work closely with faculty to integrate the learning outcomes into their particular course content. Many instructors want instruction sessions, so there's plenty of teaching to go around, but since each instruction session or assignment we design is unique, there's a pretty high barrier of entry for graduate student interns to teach in the program with us. We're lucky that the Signature Course program pays for half of the stipend for a graduate student from the School of Information here at UT to work with us to support the IL component of these courses. So each year we hire a student to do intensive teaching in the program. So we start by providing new grad assistants with ample opportunities to observe different librarians teach classes. After each class, the instructor sits down with the grad assistant to debrief and answer questions. The reason we do this is to introduce reflection and model how to use teaching experience as a chance to explore your successes and shortcomings and think about what you would do differently in the future. I think it's important to highlight the fact that every teacher has their own style, and exposing new teachers to as many styles as possible helps them start to develop their own teaching style. The grad students that we hire come to us with varying levels of teaching experience and information literacy knowledge, so we take a very personalized approach to mentoring them into a teaching role, making sure to move from one step to the next only when they let us know that they're ready. When they feel like they're ready to stop observing and begin teaching, we have them pick one section of a class to co-teach with a librarian. Our sessions often include lessons on finding background information and selecting keywords, so those are common areas for our grad students to start with. And after each co-teaching session, the grad assistant debriefs with the librarian co-teacher to talk about what went well, what they want to continue to work on, and what portion of a session they might want to try next time. Gradually, the grad assistant takes on larger and larger portions of sessions and begins practicing teaching skills that often come with more difficulty, things like leading discussions or guiding conversations around complex topics like scholarly communication. And most mentees know themselves well enough to gauge how much to take on, but I'm also willing to push a little when I think they're ready to take on bigger challenges, or sometimes hold them back a little bit if I think they're biting off more than they can chew. We also keep a list of readings that discuss pedagogical skills, information literacy concepts, first-year students' cognitive abilities, and things like that, and assign these readings to GRAs as appropriate. I schedule frequent one-on-one meetings with grad assistants who are learning to teach, and I find that having them choose a reading and prepare questions and points for us to discuss together really helps them engage with pedagogical ideas. Many of the readings we use are shorter articles like Project Information Literacy Studies, but I've also successfully used Charbouth's book, Reflective Teaching, Effective Learning, as a guiding text. I like using readings because it exposes GRAs to different teaching methods and styles, but also because it helps instill a practice of learning about teaching that I think is essential to becoming an effective teacher. Plus, it helps keep me fresh in my own practice. And on the slide you're seeing, I've linked to the ACRL instruction session Zotero list of resources because that is updated more often than our internal list, so it'll be more helpful to you. It's also important for us to teach our grad assistants how to plan classes, since our goal is for them to get to the point where they can take on an entire class from planning all the way through assessment. One of my former colleagues developed a class planning activity in which she would give the grad assistant the syllabus and assignment prompt for a particular class, and then ask her to identify learning outcomes that students would need in order to complete that assignment, and then have the grad assistant design an instruction session to teach those outcomes. This activity has always been eye-opening for our new teachers, and it helps them learn how to break down an assignment piece by piece and really see it through the student's eyes. I also find that this activity helps grad assistants start to make the mental shift from thinking of teaching as a performance, which they often start out doing, to thinking about it as a craft and more of a practice. So while all of the mentoring I've described is definitely very time intensive, it results in us being able to hand entire classes off to our grad assistants with confidence that they'll do a great job. And it often takes a semester or more to get to this point. So when we're hiring, we look for grad assistants who can stay for a year or more. And at that point, they are truly part of our community of practice here at the libraries. Now I will hand this off to my colleague Sarah to discuss doing this on a larger scale.
Hi everyone, this is Sarah. Excuse me. And as Crystal said, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we have changed the way we mentor new teachers in our department. In the past year, we have had a reorganization of our entire library structure, and through that process, our department, Teaching and Learning Services, grew. We have a few new librarians who have come into the department who are not new to UT, but are new to our department, and we have several new GRAs who have become part of our department through this whole reorg process. So what we needed to do is we needed to take this mentoring idea that we had had for years with our GRA, and we needed to adapt those same ideas of, moving at the mentee's pace and allowing people time to do things like observe and get up to speed with class planning, but we needed to do it for a lot more people. And so what we did was we really wanted to have those same ideals represented, right? That we wanted the mentees to have a lot of different experiences on their way to becoming a fully fledged member of the department and a fully fledged teacher in our UGS program. But we just needed to do it in a more set way. So what we did was we created first just a spreadsheet of observation opportunities, because that was always the first step when we were mentoring a GRA, was to have them observe. And we wanted that to be the first step with our new GRAs and our new teaching librarians. So all of the current members all of the past members of TLS were required to offer observation opportunities in their classes. And you can see just a little snippet of the spreadsheet here. I took out the names of the people who were teaching and observing, but you can see the names of the classes and some of the activities or learning outcomes that we were going to work on during that class. So the observers could see all of this information. They could see what time the class was at. They could see what we were going to cover in this class. And they were able to pick convenient times and specific learning outcomes that they were interested in. And that meant that, for example, a librarian who had recently entered our department, who didn't have a lot of experience working with undergraduates so far in their library career, could look at this and say, okay, I know one of the things that I've heard my colleagues talk about teaching is evaluating sources, and I kind of want to see how different members of the department handle that learning outcome, which is one of the outcomes we teach that is required in the signature courses. And they could say, I want to see how my different colleagues approach that learning outcome in different classes. Or they could say, you know what, I've seen a lot of people talking about evaluating sources. I feel like I have my head around that, but I really need to concentrate on classes that talk about brainstorming keywords. So in that way, they could kind of choose their own adventure as far as observing teaching goes, and make sure that they were hitting all of the learning outcomes and seeing different people teach all of those outcomes. As we continued in the semester, a lot of the TLS librarians also put up opportunities for the observees to work on negotiating with sessions with faculty and to work on planning sessions, not just the observation and reflection piece, which is what we had done at the beginning of the semester. So even over the course of the semester, we got a little bit of evolution in how much work our observers were doing on sessions. So in addition to the observation piece, which was really important but wasn't the only thing that we did, we had some other opportunities for people to participate in our teaching. So first of all, we worked really hard, and Elise is going to talk about this a little bit more, to create a community of practice around teaching in the larger UT libraries, not just in our Teaching and Learning Services department, but across the libraries. So we have a series of workshops and discussions that are open to all library staff. And typically what happens is that we pick a topic. A typical workshop topic might be something like class planning, taking a learning outcome, and then deciding how you're going to implement that outcome in a class. And a typical discussion might be something like reading an article about using discovery tools in the classroom, and then discussing how each of us use our discovery tool in our classroom. Spoiler alert, for some of us it was not at all. But those are the kinds of things that we discuss in those workshops and discussions, and they are really great for someone who's new to teaching because they allow the person to get a wide perspective about a topic. We also, of course, use the readings that Crystal mentioned, in particular Charbouth's book, for our GRAs and for the librarians who are new to working with undergrads. And then, of course, we still wanted to bake in time for one-on-one discussions. We had more people, but those discussions are so important, especially when it's around an observation of a class. And we really wanted to leave time for that reflection piece. So we had some things that really worked through this process and a few things that didn't work so well. So what worked, and this balloon picture, y'all, is my favorite thing. What worked is that we had more discussion of teaching in general. When we were only onboarding one GRA a year, say, which was kind of typical in the past, that was really a one-on-one relationship with the GRA's supervisor and the GRA with occasional observations of other members of the department. So that discussion of teaching just didn't get as large and robust as it has now that we have so many more people that we're trying to onboard and make full teaching members of the department. So that was really great, and Elise is going to talk a little bit more about that. Second, everybody could observe. We did have a variety of times. We all committed to offering at least 2 classes for observation, and most of us offered more than that. So everybody who needed to get in observation and to start to become a full teaching member of our department had that opportunity, which was great. And then people could also choose topics that they were most interested in. You know, we had GRAs who specifically wanted to learn about, okay, how are we talking about evaluation? And if that was their focus, they could choose classes that were teaching that learning outcome. There were a couple of things, though, that took a little bit of time to get going. So first, we implemented this in the spring, and in the spring for us, we have fewer classes than we do in the fall. Our teaching load in the fall is pretty significant, but in the spring, it's much less. So I think in the fall, we're going to have even more opportunities for people to pick and choose which classes they want to do and to have an even more robust experience as an observer as they get up to speed. And then the departmental buy-in just took a little while. We were implementing this in the spring, and we missed a few classes at the very beginning of the spring where no one was observing because we hadn't gotten the system into place. Luckily, though, as we look towards fall, we have this system in place. Everyone knows that it's an expectation to list their classes, so I don't foresee us having the same problem as we go into fall. All right, so now I'm going to turn this over to Elise, who is going to talk more about her peer mentoring program.
Hey y'all. Okay, so this peer mentoring program kind of is different from the initiatives that Crystal and Sarah talked about, in that it was open to all staff in our organization, and therefore, because it was outside of our very teaching-focused department, it encompassed staff who don't teach as often as we do, and also teach in a variety of ways into different populations than maybe we do in our unit, which is very first-year focused. So I initiated this program a few years back with about 10 staff members from across the organization. And it came about because folks felt like their teaching was happening in isolation and that they needed a way to refresh their approaches. The community of practice that you can build with a peer-to-peer mentoring program like this will identify and inspire further training and development opportunities. So the first thing to keep in mind is how to communicate the program to your staff. So I took some inspiration about my program that I initiated from Carolyn Sinkinson's approach in a 2011 article, which is called An Assessment of Peer Coaching to Drive Professional Development and Reflective Teaching. And what I liked about her approach and what I adapted was the focus on librarians adopting a teacher identity with the support of colleagues. I also took inspiration from her assessment approach. And I wanted to make sure when we started the program that this was a partnership to improve teaching and not to evaluate it, and that no matter where you are in your teaching or how long you've done it, you can always improve your teaching. So the first thing I did was do a little pre-assessment for pairing up folks, and this kind of is a little bit similar to what Dawn suggested. You could pair people up based on their goals. I shared the assessment data that I gathered anonymously, so that allowed folks to share experiences and doubts. And it was also useful to share things like, I found that 60% of respondents wanted to incorporate a new technology into their teaching. So it could inspire other initiatives in-house, like staff workshops or the identification of expertise within the staff. So these are some suggestions for questions to ask, but make sure you just have some goals in mind for what you want to know, and that could be something you use to create trainings or to structure the program or to pair people up, which I'll talk about a little bit. So when you get the peer mentoring program going, it's a good idea to give folks suggestions for how to foster their relationship. As I said, some of these folks don't teach as much as others, so observing each other's teaching is one of the many ways that you could do this, but you could also delve into the literature or have discussion meetings, attend a webinar like this together, or have a post-conference brown bag. You can create a class plan or assessment tool together, do some research, but definitely, as Dawn mentioned earlier, you have to set goals for the partnership and something to work for. If you have an existing community of practice, like a journal discussion club in your organization, that's a good way to kind of foster and structure the buddy relationship. Just an opportunity to be reflective about your teaching, like Sarah said. So goals. I thought that giving goal examples was helpful because this may be the first time that folks are thinking about their teaching deliberately. They may not know how to articulate goals. They may think, oh, I think this goal is too small, too short term, or they may think like this is too big to tackle over the course of this relationship, this is too long term. So give them some ideas to build off of and a range of time that it might take to develop this. So is it something that could be observed over a few different observation opportunities? Is it something that you could do research on together? Or is it something that you can maybe give feedback to your peer mentor in one session? So I also acknowledged that this was scary because nobody wants to be judged, but also it's important to acknowledge that getting feedback is difficult and scary, but giving feedback is difficult. And a lot of people think that maybe they don't have the expertise enough to give feedback or to, evaluate somebody else's teaching, which is not the goal, like I said before. But they may feel a burden there or some doubt, some self-doubt. But just acknowledge that and set the tone as supportive and encouraging and not about gotcha moments so that everybody feels comfortable. I like to define what feedback should look like. And here are some questions or some things to think about when you think about what feedback should look like. Just to remember that teaching is never too perfect, that there's no room to improve, and that useful feedback is specific and timely. And again, like this is about encouragement and support. I thought framing it that way was helpful. So I had a kickoff meeting to introduce the buddies, that's what I call them. So I matched people up by goals, but that was really difficult and it was a bit flawed because there weren't always clear matches. I also tried to do it randomly, and that had some pitfalls as well because people were ill-matched. And I'd say this was the most challenging part of the initiative. So it's something to think about. The kickoff meeting, the way I facilitated it was I had some discussion starter questions to identify commonalities, inspiration, and areas of expertise, such as, is there a librarian or thinker that you admire? What's your favorite thing to teach? What's the best teaching experience you ever had and why? It's cool to see what inspires us as professionals, and we don't get to talk about it that often. Also talk about bad experiences or what you dread about teaching because people love to commiserate. Also, make this practical, a place to set goals, like I said before, and also bring your calendar so you can schedule meetings or observations at the outset because it's less likely that things will fall by the wayside once the semester starts going. So, check up with your cohort. This is up to you. I didn't leave time to remind buddies about getting together, but I found that when I did my post-assessment, this was the thing that was most asked for. Could you check in with us and keep us on track? I don't have time to do that, but that's up to you. I offered them ideas and resources at the kickoff meeting, but I wanted to let you know that that's what they asked for, so it's something for you to consider. I also heard that some buddies felt ill-matched or had a buddy that was less responsive, and these are the pitfalls of matching people up, and I often wonder if it would have gone better if people had chosen their own willing buddy that had already bought into the program, at their level, at their commitment level, rather than me pairing people up based on interest and goals. Post-assessment was anonymous. I gave them space to identify what went well and what didn't and why, and would they work with their buddy again, how often they met, etc. So what have we learned? We learned that throughout this process, all these processes, that mentoring is time-consuming, but it's worth it. When folks are engaged and enthusiastic about the process, we all stay fresh and motivated in our teaching. So that's all I had to do. I just want to say that if you're looking for a way to invigorate your teaching and build a community of practice, as well as identify common areas that folks could use training or professional development in, mentoring can also be really helpful. And that was the most tangible result of the last mentoring approach that I discussed. So now I'll open it up to questions.
Yes, so hi everyone, this is Holly, one of the members of the committee. So we're going to open the floor for questions. We have about 15 minutes right now. There were a couple in the chat, so we'll get started with those, and then as we're going, if anybody else has additional questions that they want to ask, please drop them in the chat box and we will direct them to the presenters. Okay, so the first question we had was for Dawn. About the speed mentoring that you talked about, and one of our attendees was wondering if you could imagine how that might work within an organization where individuals already know each other somewhat.
Sure. Actually, I read Margie's question and I replied back to her, but I think that speed mentoring in a single organization would work well for getting to know those hidden things about people that you might not know already. Things that they might not think immediately would be of interest or benefit for the institution, but might have some sort of hidden value. Things that come to my mind would be a person that was at Florida State when I was there who retired. She cleaned up a portion of the Appalachian Trail. I think that would have been fantastic to know ahead of time. Another one that didn't come out until after I had been at Oregon Tech for a few years is the director of the library, Kelly Peterson-Fairchild, also does drag racing. And as a drag racer, she understands a lot about aerodynamics, mechanical engineering, manufacturing for the race cars themselves. And that would be of great assistance, since those are some of the areas that I have to do collection development and liaison work with. So just things like that that would come out that you might not already know.
Awesome. Okay, so I had a question, and this could really be, I think, for any of the presenters. I personally work with graduate students who are not necessarily going into libraries or going into education and teaching, and we do rely on them to do some of the teaching in our classrooms. So one of my questions was, have any of you worked with similar students where they're not necessarily interested in pursuing library science or interested in pursuing education as a career, and did you or how would you potentially approach your mentoring differently under those types of circumstances?
This is Crystal. So actually, the last grad student that I mentored was in the School of Information, but she was not planning on being a librarian. And she knew that it was a teaching role, so she was already interested in teaching, which helps. But what we ended up doing was kind of focusing more on the parts that she found really interesting. So for example, she wanted to go into more of a data-centered role in her career, and so we focused a lot on assessment, and she was really energized by coming up with learning activities that included assessment and then following up with the faculty members to share, okay, after the instruction session, here's what we found. And so that was great because, first of all, that's an important skill to learn, but we were able to tailor what she already needed to do, the teaching, to what was interesting career-wise for her. And so whenever she started to go on interviews for non-teaching jobs, she could still talk about some of the projects she did with assessment and could relate those. So that would be one suggestion I have, is just to find some aspect to motivate them that relates to what their career goals are. Because I feel like with most things people are interested in, there's some way to incorporate teaching into it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Do we have any more questions from our attendees, if you want to drop them in the chat box?
We got a private question over here that we can address. Let me hand the headset off to Sarah.
Great, sure.
So the question we got was, how do you get people to being open to being observed? And that is tricky. Teaching is really personal. Some people don't like to have somebody else in their classroom, and everybody has a different background. So I came from K-12 where you had to be open to people being in your classroom because people came in all the time. But a lot of people, if they've only taught in a library, that has not been the case. So one of the things that's really important is, as Elise said, to make this about improving your teaching practice, and in no way is it like a judgment thing, or is it, you know, evaluative. Really, it's just about reflection and improving your practice and being able to talk to somebody about your teaching. I think framing observation that way is really important for getting people on board. And second, allowing people to sort of tailor their experience is really important. So if they have somebody that they specifically want to ask to observe them, that's really great, right? If there's somebody they really trust, that they trust to have in their classroom. If they have an activity that they really love and they only want someone to come observe for that activity, that may be a really good way to start an observation or a mentoring relationship, right? For them to be able to pick, this is the thing I'm really proud of, and why don't you come in and watch that thing, before they maybe do the vulnerable thing of, I'm not sure about this activity, can you come and give me feedback? That's kind of how I would get it started. Does anybody have anything else you want to add, Dawn or?
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that question with us. We've had a couple other ones come in the chat. So the next one is, I work at a grad-only school. I have students or peer teachers teach only first-level courses, and I teach all of the higher-level courses. Are there courses you do not have your students teach?
This is Sarah from UT again. I can kind of speak to our experience here. There are a lot of courses that graduate students don't teach here, but it's not because we would never let them be involved. It's just because we don't have enough graduate students to teach all the classes that we teach. But I think in general, most people most of our liaison librarians, most of the librarians in teaching and learning services, which is our department, are really open to having graduate students at least involved in any class. And in consultations, yeah, Elise just reminded me that consultations are part of that, and that is something that we have been increasingly trying to get our graduate students involved in. So I don't think we have very many librarians who would say, no, I can't have a grad student involved in this class.
All right, and next question we have is for anyone, which is, since mentoring is so time-consuming, do you have suggestions about ways to reward or recognize mentors to help motivate their engagement?
This is Dawn. I've talked to a number of mentors and dealt with a number of people that were in that, and a lot of them are doing it just to share knowledge and information. I do it through the Answerland service here, and I do it just to share and get to know people. I think that, at least for me and the people I've spoken to, is enough of a reward. The first year of Llama mentoring, I know there was gift cards to encourage people to go out and meet together because you actually had to go to ALA at that point. And we don't do that anymore because you don't have to go to ALA, so you may never actually meet in person.
How about the folks over at UT? Did you offer specific ways to reward or recognize mentors to help motivate their engagement in any of the programs that you talked about?
We didn't offer any. Sorry, there's somebody's typing. So we didn't offer any incentives in-house.
Okay, so it looks like follow-up to one of the earlier questions about whether or not you had courses that you did not allow students to teach. Did you have students that taught, or your graduate assistants that taught upper-level grad classes? Because I think this person was asking specifically about graduate-level courses.
This is Elise again. A lot of our instruction for grad students tends to be one-on-one with our liaisons for things like doing a literature review. Again, I never heard anybody, I've definitely never heard anybody say I don't want grad students to teach other grad students. I think at least having another grad student in the room is actually really helpful. A lot of our instruction sessions have some sort of like active learning or lab time period where folks can do searches, etc., or ask questions one-on-one. So that's a good time to incorporate a grad student in, and just, you know, obviously if that grad student, just setting up the expectation if they can't answer a question, that they should defer to the librarian. I think that's how we've handled it, but like Sarah said, we don't have a ton of graduate students that are available in our organization to do this type of work, so there really hasn't been many opportunities to test this.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. We do have about 4 minutes left, so if anybody has any last-minute questions, you're welcome to add those. Okay, well, it looks like we may have all of our questions answered for now. So we'll just say thank you again to our presenters, Dawn, Sarah, Elise, and Crystal, as well as the members of the ACRL Instruction Sections Management and Leadership Committee, and Elois and Sophie at ACRL for hosting us. Do remember we will be sending out the link with the recording for the session as soon as we have that available. And just one last plug for the last webinar in our series, the third and final one, titled Critical Reflection to Improve and Grow as Librarians Who Teach, will be held on June 2nd from 11 to noon Central Time, and we hope that we will see many of you there for that webinar as well. So thank you everyone for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.